I never thought the day would come when a man married to my daughter would raise his hand against me. At 65, I had endured storms, buried loved ones, and built a life brick by brick with my own hands. But nothing prepared me for the sting of that moment, the sharp humiliation that cut deeper than the slap itself. It wasn't just the pain on my cheek, it was the message behind it. "You're old," he sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. "Stay out of this." The room fell silent. My daughter froze, her eyes darting between us, torn between loyalty and fear. My grandson, too young to understand, stared wide-eyed. And me, I stood there stunned, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to shout, to demand respect, but the words caught in my throat. I had always believed family was sacred, that blood bound us together. Yet in that instant, I realized blood could also betray. My daughter rushed to his side, whispering, "He didn't mean it, Papa. He's just stressed." That word echoed in my ears like a cruel joke. Stress was the excuse, the shield they used to cover his arrogance. I saw the way he looked at me, the smirk that said he knew he could get away with it. And worse, I saw the way she avoided my gaze, as if my pain was an inconvenience. I retreated to my room, my cheeks still burning, my dignity bruised. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the walls that had witnessed decades of my life. Every photograph, every memory seemed to mock me. Was this what I had worked for? To be dismissed, disrespected, treated like a burden in my own home. The voices outside grew louder. My daughter's tone was pleading, his was commanding. "He's losing his mind," I heard him say. "He shouldn't interfere in matters he doesn't understand." Gaslighting. That's what it was. They wanted me to doubt myself, to believe I was weak, senile, incapable. But I wasn't. I knew exactly what had happened, and I knew exactly what it meant. I walked to the kitchen later that evening, my steps slow but deliberate. The house smelled of spices and simmering broth. Cooking had always been my refuge, a place where I could pour my heart into something tangible. Tonight, though, it was different. Tonight, every chop of the knife, every stir of the pot carried weight. My hands moved calmly, but inside me, a storm raged. He entered the kitchen briefly, his voice casual, almost mocking. "Make sure it's good tonight," he said, patting his stomach. I looked at him, my eyes steady, my voice quiet. "We'll see." He chuckled, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than a servant. But I wasn't broken. I was planning. As I laid the table, I thought about the years I had spent teaching my daughter values, the lessons about respect and loyalty. Where had those lessons gone? Had she forgotten them, or had she chosen to ignore them for the sake of comfort? My heart ached, but my resolve hardened. Dinner was served. The family gathered, laughter forced, tension thick in the air. He sat at the head of the table, as if he owned it, as if my years of labor meant nothing. My daughter smiled weakly, trying to keep peace, but her eyes betrayed unease. I watched them both, every gesture, every word. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, but my mind was elsewhere. I wasn't thinking about the food. I was thinking about justice, about dignity, about the lesson that needed to be taught. As the plates clinked and the conversation stumbled, I thought to myself this meal would be remembered. Not for its taste, not for its warmth, but for what it represented. It was the beginning of something, the beginning of a reckoning. I kept my silence, letting them believe I had swallowed the insult, letting them think I was too old, too weak to fight back. But inside, I was sharper than ever. Every word he had spoken, every dismissal, every bruise on my pride was fuel. That night, as I cleared the dishes and washed them one by one, I felt a strange calm settle over me. The humiliation had transformed into determination. The anger had crystallized into purpose. I knew what I had to do. And so, as I dried the last plate and placed it back on the shelf, I whispered to myself, "This meal will be remembered." When I think back to the years when my daughter was little, I remember the sound of her laughter echoing through these very halls. She was my pride, my joy. The reason I worked long hours and sacrificed comforts. Her mother and I raised her with values of respect, honesty, and loyalty. I wanted her to grow up knowing that family was not just blood, but a bond of trust and care. Those memories are warm, like sunlight on my skin, and they remind me of the man I used to be before shadows crept into this house. I still recall the day she introduced me to the man who would become her husband. He was polite, well-dressed, and spoke with confidence. I saw in him a spark of ambition, and I thought perhaps he would be a good partner for her. He shook my hand firmly, looked me in the eye, and said, "Sir, I will take care of your daughter." At that moment, I believed him. I wanted to believe him. After all, what father doesn't hope his child will find someone who will cherish her? Their wedding was modest but beautiful. Friends and relatives gathered, and I watched her walk down the aisle with tears in my eyes. I thought I was handing her into safe hands. I thought I was gaining a son, not losing a daughter. For a while, things seemed fine. He visited often, spoke respectfully, and even asked me for advice on small matters. I felt a sense of relief, thinking I had chosen well in trusting him. But time has a way of revealing true character. Slowly, I began to notice changes. He would linger around the house, not with admiration but with calculation. His eyes scanned the walls, the furniture, the land outside, as if he were assessing value rather than appreciating home. One evening, as we sat together, he casually remarked, "This house will be ours someday." He said it with a smile, but behind that smile was something sharp, something greedy. I laughed it off at first, thinking it was a careless comment. But the words stayed with me. Ours someday. Not hers, not mine, but his. It was as if he had already claimed ownership, as if my years of labor and sacrifice were nothing more than a temporary arrangement until he could take over. My daughter noticed my unease and tried to soothe me. "Papa, he means well," she said, her voice gentle, almost pleading. "He's just thinking about the future." But I knew better. I had lived long enough to recognize the difference between planning and coveting. His tone was not about care, it was about possession. The truth is, I don't have vast wealth. What I have is modest, a house built with my own hands, some savings tucked away, and a small piece of land that has been in our family for generations. To me, these things are not riches but symbols of hard work and legacy. They are meant to provide security, not to feed greed. Yet to him, they seemed like treasures waiting to be claimed. I began to notice how he spoke to others about the property. Subtle remarks slipped into conversations, hints that one day he would be the man of this house. He carried himself with entitlement, as if my presence was temporary, as if I were already fading into irrelevance. My daughter, caught between her love for him and her loyalty to me, grew quieter. She avoided confrontation, choosing peace over truth. I could see the conflict in her eyes, the way she wanted to defend me but feared upsetting him. It hurt to watch her struggle. I wanted to tell her that loyalty to family should never mean silence in the face of disrespect. But I also knew that love can blind, and she was blinded by her desire to keep her marriage intact. I didn't blame her entirely. I blamed him for planting seeds of division, for turning her heart against the values she had been raised with. The more I observed, the clearer it became. His ambition was not about building something of his own. It was about taking what already existed. He wanted control, ownership, power. And he saw me as an obstacle, a hurdle to be removed. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the good memories. But betrayal has a way of poisoning even the sweetest recollections. The laughter of my daughter as a child now echoed with sorrow, because I feared she had forgotten the lessons I taught her. The warmth of family dinners now felt cold, because I knew he sat at the table not as a son but as a predator. Still, I kept my silence. I watched, I listened, I remembered. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, I stored away. I knew that one day these seeds of betrayal would grow into something undeniable. And when that day came, I would be ready. It began with small things, the kind you almost overlook if you're not paying attention. At first, I told myself I was imagining it, that perhaps I was being too sensitive. But the truth was, my son-in-law had started to take control of matters that were never his to begin with. One morning I went to check the household accounts, something I had always done myself. I kept neat records, every expense written in my own hand, every receipt carefully stored. But when I opened the drawer, the ledger was gone. I asked my daughter, and she hesitated before saying, "He thought it would be easier if he handled it." "You've been forgetting things lately, Papa." Forgetting things. The words stung. I had not forgotten. I had simply been slower, more deliberate, as age demands. But forgetting, no. That was his excuse, his way of pushing me aside. When I confronted him, he smirked. "You shouldn't worry about money anymore. You're forgetful, and it's better if I take care of it." His tone was patronizing, as if I were a child. I clenched my fists, swallowing the anger that rose in me. "I built this home with my hands," I said quietly. Every brick, every wall, every nail. Don't tell me I don't understand how to manage it. He laughed, dismissive, and walked away. The gaslighting grew worse. Whenever I misplaced something, he would seize the opportunity. "See, you're senile?" he would say, shaking his head as if pitying me. My daughter would look down, unable to meet my eyes. I wanted to shout, to remind her of the man I had been, the father who had raised her, the worker who had sacrificed everything for this family. But she remained silent, caught between her love for him and her loyalty to me. One afternoon I tried to enter my study, the small room where I kept my journals and important papers. The door was locked. I searched for the key, but it was gone. When I asked him, he shrugged. "It's better if you don't go in there. You might misplace something important." Misplace. That word again, used like a weapon. My study had always been my sanctuary, the place where I wrote my thoughts, where I kept the documents that told the story of my life. And now I was barred from it, as if I were a stranger in my own home. I remember standing outside that locked door, my hand resting on the knob, my chest heavy with disbelief. How had it come to this? How had I allowed him to strip me of my dignity, piece by piece? The humiliations continued. He mocked my handwriting, the careful script I had used for decades. "No one can read this," he said, waving a paper in front of my daughter. "It looks like the scribbles of an old man." She tried to laugh it off, but I saw the discomfort in her eyes. I wanted to remind him that those scribbles had recorded every expense, every plan, every detail that kept this household running. But he didn't care. To him it was another way to belittle me, another way to make me feel small. At night I lay awake, my mind racing. Anxiety gnawed at me. Disbelief turned to anger. I had always believed that respect for elders was sacred, that no matter what, children and their spouses would honor those who came before them. But here I was, treated like a burden, dismissed as senile. Locked out of my own study, stripped of my role in the family. I began to notice how he spoke to others too. When neighbors visited, he would answer questions before I could, speaking over me, making me seem irrelevant. "He forgets things," he would say casually, smiling as if it were a harmless joke. But I knew it was deliberate. He was planting seeds, shaping the narrative that I was losing my mind, that I was no longer capable. The injustice burned inside me. I wanted to fight back, to reclaim my place, but I knew I had to be careful. He was cunning, and my daughter was under his influence. If I pushed too hard, I risked losing her completely. So I stayed quiet, observing, storing every insult, every humiliation in my memory. One evening, as we sat at the table, he looked at me with that same smirk and said, "Soon, this will all be mine." My daughter gasped, whispering, "Don't say that." But he only laughed. I stared at him, my voice steady, my eyes unwavering. "I built this home with my hands," I said again, louder this time. "And don't you forget it." He shrugged, unconcerned, and continued eating. But inside me, something shifted. The betrayal was no longer subtle. It was clear, undeniable. He was not just disrespecting me, he was plotting to take everything I had built. That night, as I sat alone, I felt the weight of anger pressing down on me. Anxiety had turned into determination. I knew now that this was not just about disrespect. It was about betrayal, about greed, about a man who saw me as an obstacle to be removed. And I knew I could not let it continue. The days that followed were heavier than any I had known. It wasn't just the sting of disrespect anymore. It was the slow erosion of my place in my own home. My daughter, once my closest ally, began to echo her husband's words. "Papa, don't make trouble," she said one evening when I tried to question why I no longer had access to the household accounts. Her voice was soft, almost pleading, but it carried the weight of betrayal. She wanted peace, but peace at the cost of my dignity. I looked at her, searching for the girl I had raised, the child who once clung to my hand and promised she would always stand by me. But now, she avoided my gaze, her loyalty bending toward the man who had married her. "You should rest more," she added, as if my age was an illness, as if my silence was the cure. Rest more. Those words were meant to soothe, but they cut deep. Rest was not what I needed. Respect was. Her husband grew bolder with each passing day. He strutted through the house as though it already belonged to him, his voice loud, his tone commanding. "You're lucky we let you stay," he told me one afternoon, his smirk dripping with arrogance. Let me stay. In the house I had built, in the home that carried my sweat and sacrifice. The audacity of it made my blood boil. But I swallowed the rage, knowing that open defiance would only push my daughter further away. The gaslighting spread beyond the walls of our home. Neighbors began to look at me differently, their smiles tinged with pity. I overheard whispers, subtle but sharp. "He's losing his mind," they said, repeating the poison my son-in-law had fed them. He had crafted a narrative, painting me as senile, forgetful, incapable. And the worst part was that people believed him. They saw my age, my slower steps, and assumed his words were truth. I felt trapped, cornered in the very place that was supposed to be my sanctuary. Every attempt to assert myself was met with dismissal. If I spoke up, my daughter would sigh, "Papa, please, don't make trouble." If I questioned decisions, he would laugh. "You're forgetful. You don't understand." Slowly, they chipped away at my confidence, trying to make me doubt my own mind. But I knew the truth. I was not losing my mind. I was losing my family to greed. In the silence of my room, I began to journal. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I would take out a small notebook and write down everything that happened. Every insult, every humiliation, every word they spoke. My handwriting, mocked by him as the scribbles of an old man, became my weapon. Each line was a record, each page a testament to the reality they tried to erase. Writing gave me a sense of control, a way to reclaim my voice. As I filled the pages, I felt a spark of resistance flicker inside me. They could call me senile, they could lock me out of my study, they could spread lies to the neighbors. But they could not erase the truth I carried in my heart and on those pages. Still, the fear lingered. I worried about what they might do next. Would they try to take legal control of my property? Would they push me out entirely? The helplessness weighed on me, pressing down like a heavy stone. I walked through the house cautiously, aware that every step, every word could be twisted against me. One evening, as we sat at dinner, he leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with mockery. "You're lucky we let you stay," he repeated, louder this time, as if daring me to challenge him. My daughter looked down at her plate, silent. I clenched my jaw, my hands trembling under the table. I wanted to shout, to remind him that this was my home, my legacy. But instead I swallowed the words, storing them for later, for the moment when silence would no longer serve me. The isolation grew. Friends who once visited stopped coming, perhaps uncomfortable with the tension, perhaps swayed by the lies. I felt the walls closing in, the house shrinking around me. Yet in that shrinking space, my resolve grew. The journal became thicker, the entries longer. I wrote not just what happened, but how it made me feel. The fear, the anger, the determination. I realized that while they tried to strip me of dignity, they were also giving me something: evidence. Every insult, every dismissal, every cruel remark was fuel. And though I felt helpless in the moment, I knew that one day these records would matter. That night, as I closed my journal and placed it under my pillow, I whispered to myself, "They think I am weak. They think I am fading. But they will see." The despair had not vanished, but it had transformed. Fear had become vigilance. Helplessness had become quiet preparation. Rage had become resolve. And though they believed they were winning, I knew the battle was only beginning. It was a quiet afternoon when I stepped outside to sweep the porch, the sun heavy on my shoulders. I moved slowly, my body aching from the weight of days filled with humiliation. I thought I was alone, but then I heard a familiar voice call my name. It was Rashid, my old neighbor and friend, a man who had known me for decades. He walked toward me, his brow furrowed, his eyes scanning my face. "Brother, what happened to you?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. I froze, unsure of how to respond. His gaze lingered on the faint bruise near my temple, the mark I had tried to hide. I wanted to brush it off, to say I had slipped, but the concern in his eyes broke through my silence. "It's nothing," I muttered, but even as I said it, I knew the lie was weak. Rashid shook his head, his voice firm. "Don't tell me it's nothing. I've known you too long. You don't carry marks like that without reason." I felt my chest tighten, the shame pressing down. For weeks I had endured in silence, convincing myself that no one would believe me, that speaking out would only make things worse. But here was someone who saw me, who refused to accept the false narrative. His insistence cracked the wall I had built around myself. I invited him inside, my hands trembling as I poured tea. We sat at the table, the same table where my son-in-law had mocked me, where my daughter had pleaded for me to stay quiet. The air felt heavy, but Rashid's presence brought a strange comfort. He leaned forward, his voice softer now. "Tell me the truth. What's happening in this house?" The words spilled out before I could stop them. I told him about the insults, the gaslighting, the locked study, the way my daughter had begun to side with her husband. I spoke of the whispers among neighbors, the lies spread about my mind failing. And finally, I confessed about the night my son-in-law laid a hand on me. The sting of that slap that had ignited a fire inside me. Rashid listened without interruption, his eyes steady, his jaw clenched. When I finished, he placed his hand on mine and said, "You're not crazy. They're stealing your dignity." His words pierced through the fog of doubt, anchoring me in truth. For the first time in weeks, I felt seen, validated. I rose from my chair and walked to the small drawer where I kept my secret journal. Pulling it out, I placed it on the table before him. "I've been writing everything down," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. He opened the notebook, flipping through the pages filled with my careful handwriting. Each entry was a record of the abuse, the insults, the manipulations. He nodded, his expression grave. "This is good. Document everything. Every word, every act. Don't let them erase your reality." His advice carried weight, not just as a friend but as someone who understood the importance of evidence. I felt a surge of relief, as if the burden I had carried alone was now shared. Rashid's presence reminded me that I was not as isolated as they wanted me to believe. He believed me, and that belief gave me strength. We spoke for hours, the tea growing cold between us. He told me stories of others who had faced betrayal, of elders whose children had tried to strip them of their rights. "It's greed," he said, shaking his head. "It blinds them. But you must not let it break you." His words lit a spark inside me. For so long I had felt helpless, trapped in a cycle of humiliation. But now, with Rashid by my side, I saw a path forward. I realized that silence was their weapon, and my voice was my defense. As evening fell, Rashid stood to leave. Before he walked out, he turned to me and said, "You are stronger than they think. Keep writing. Keep remembering. And when the time comes, we will make sure justice is served." I watched him walk down the path, his figure fading into the dusk. My heart felt lighter, my resolve firmer. I was no longer alone in this fight. The journal in my hands was no longer just a record of pain, it was a weapon, a shield, a testament to the truth. That night, as I sat by the lamp, I wrote with renewed purpose. My words flowed steady, each line carrying the weight of defiance. I no longer wrote just for myself. I wrote for justice, for dignity, for the day when the lies would crumble. The fear had not vanished, but it no longer consumed me. Relief had taken its place, hope had begun to grow. I knew the road ahead would be difficult. But I also knew I had an ally, someone who believed in me, someone who would stand beside me when the time came. And as I closed the journal, I whispered to myself, "They think I am alone. But I am not. They will see." The night Rashid left, his words echoed in my mind like a steady drumbeat, "Document everything." I sat alone at the table, my journal open before me, and I realized that silence had served its purpose. Now it was time to act. I had endured humiliation, gaslighting, and betrayal, but I was not broken. I was a man who had built his life with his own hands, and I would not let greed strip me of my dignity. I began to think carefully, methodically. My son-in-law's greatest weakness was not his arrogance. It was his greed. He wanted control, ownership, power. He believed I was too old, too weak to resist, and that belief would be his downfall. If he thought he was clever, I would show him what true cunning looked like. The plan started with paper. I created a set of documents, carefully handwritten, detailing supposed investments and hidden accounts. They were convincing enough to tempt a greedy man, but vague enough to be useless. I placed them in a folder, leaving it where I knew he would eventually find it. I wanted him to think he had uncovered a secret, something he could use against me. At the same time, I prepared my recorder. Rashid had helped me acquire a small device, easy to hide, capable of capturing every word. I tested it late at night, speaking softly into the microphone, listening back to ensure clarity. It worked perfectly. I knew my son-in-law's arrogance would lead him to boast, and when he did, I would have proof. The suspense of it all filled me with a strange energy. For weeks I had felt powerless, but now, with each step of the plan, I felt strength returning. I was no longer the victim they believed me to be. I was the strategist, the architect of justice. I began to bait him with subtle remarks. One evening, as he sat at the table, I looked at him and said, "You like to eat well, don't you?" He laughed, patting his stomach. "Of course. What's the point of life if not to enjoy it?" His arrogance was palpable, and I smiled faintly, knowing that soon he would be served more than food. The dinner invitation became the centerpiece of my plan. I told my daughter and her husband that I wanted to host a special meal, a gesture of peace, a way to bring the family together. My daughter seemed relieved, eager for reconciliation. He, on the other hand, smirked, believing I was finally submitting, finally accepting my place beneath him. But I knew better. That dinner would be remembered. In the days leading up to it, I set the stage. I placed the folder of fake financial documents in my study, unlocked just enough to tempt him. I left hints in my journal, carefully positioned where he might stumble upon them. I wanted him to believe he was clever, that he was uncovering secrets I had tried to hide. His greed would drive him to speak, and my recorder would capture every word. I rehearsed the evening in my mind, every detail planned. The food would be rich, the atmosphere calm, the conversation seemingly harmless. But beneath the surface it would be a trap. I would guide him, nudge him, let his arrogance spill out until he revealed himself completely. The suspense grew with each passing day. I felt like a hunter waiting for the right moment, patient but determined. My daughter noticed my calmness and asked, "Papa, are you feeling better?" I smiled gently, replying, "Better than ever." She didn't know that beneath my calm exterior, a storm of determination was brewing. On the morning of the dinner, I stood in the kitchen, preparing the meal with deliberate care. Every chop of the knife, every stir of the pot carried meaning. I thought of the years I had spent feeding this family, nourishing them with love and sacrifice. Tonight, the food would carry a different weight. Tonight, it would be the stage for justice. As I set the table, I placed the recorder discreetly nearby, hidden but ready. I imagined his voice filling the room, arrogant and careless, incriminating himself without realizing it. I imagined the moment when his own words would become the weapon that destroyed him. The plan was simple, but its power lay in patience. I would not confront him directly. I would let him expose himself, let his greed and arrogance do the work. And when the time came, I would have the evidence, undeniable and clear. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, I looked at the table. The food steaming, the recorder hidden, the folder waiting. My heart pounded, not with fear but with anticipation. I whispered to myself, "Tonight, I'll serve him more than food." The door opened, and they entered, my daughter smiling nervously, my son-in-law grinning with smug confidence. He believed he was walking into a meal of reconciliation, but in truth, he was walking into a trap. I greeted them warmly, my voice steady, my demeanor calm. Inside, I was burning with determination. The stage was set, the plan in motion, and as we sat down together, I thought to myself this was no longer about survival. This was about justice. The evening arrived with a stillness that felt almost unnatural. I stood in the kitchen, the aroma of spices filling the air, my hands steady as I prepared the meal. Every movement was deliberate, every detail carefully arranged. Tonight was not just about food, it was about justice. I had waited patiently, endured humiliation, and now the moment had come to turn their arrogance into evidence. My daughter entered first, her smile tentative, her eyes searching mine for reassurance. She believed this dinner was a gesture of peace, a chance to mend the tension that had grown between us. I gave her a gentle nod, masking the storm that churned beneath my calm exterior. Then he arrived, my son-in-law, swaggering into the room with that familiar smirk, his voice loud and confident. "Ah, finally," he said, rubbing his hands together. "I knew you'd come around." I said nothing, only gestured toward the table. The recorder was hidden, its small light blinking silently beneath the cloth, ready to capture every word. I had placed it carefully, knowing his arrogance would lead him to boast. We sat down together, the clinking of plates filling the silence. I served him generously, watching as he devoured the food with satisfaction. He leaned back in his chair, his voice dripping with mockery. "You know," he said, glancing at my daughter, "soon this will all be mine. The house, the land, everything. He's too old to manage it. Too weak." My daughter shifted uncomfortably, whispering, "Don't say that." But he only laughed, waving her off. "It's the truth. He can barely keep track of his own thoughts. Look at him. sitting there quietly, pretending he still matters. I felt the sting of his words, but I did not react. Instead, I kept my gaze steady, my voice calm. "Enjoy your dinner," I said softly, the weight of my words hanging in the air. He chuckled, mistaking my composure for surrender. The recorder captured it all: the arrogance, the greed, the insults. Every word was evidence, every boast a nail in the coffin of his credibility. I let him speak, guiding the conversation with subtle remarks, nudging him to reveal more. "You seem confident," I said, pouring him another glass. "What makes you so sure?" He grinned, leaning forward. "Because it's inevitable. Once you're gone, everything falls to us. And frankly, I don't think you'll last much longer. You're lucky we let you stay." My daughter gasped, her eyes wide, but she remained silent. I watched her, wondering if she realized the depth of his betrayal, the cruelty of his words. Perhaps she did, but fear kept her quiet. I continued to serve the meal, each dish placed before him with deliberate care. He ate greedily, his arrogance growing with every bite. "I'll renovate the place," he said, gesturing around the room. "Make it modern. This old style doesn't suit me. It'll be mine soon enough." I nodded, my expression unreadable. Inside, satisfaction bloomed. He was incriminating himself, exposing his greed, his disrespect, his intentions. And all of it was being recorded. Rashid had promised to help secure the evidence, and I knew he was waiting nearby. After the meal, when my son-in-law retired to the living room, I slipped away to meet Rashid at the back door. I handed him the recorder, my voice low but firm. "It's all there," I said. "Every word." He nodded, his eyes shining with determination. "This is enough. He's trapped by his own arrogance." Relief washed over me, but I kept my composure. The plan was not yet complete. The evidence had to be preserved, presented at the right moment. For now, I returned to the table, my demeanor calm as if nothing had happened. My son-in-law looked at me, his smirk unwavering. "See, you're quiet because you know I'm right." He leaned back, satisfied, believing he had won. But I knew the truth. His words were no longer just insults, they were proof. The tension in the room was thick, every moment charged with anticipation. My daughter avoided my gaze, her hands trembling slightly as she cleared the dishes. I wondered if she sensed the shift, if she realized that her husband's arrogance had crossed a line that could not be erased. I sat silently, my mind steady, my heart calm. The satisfaction was not in his downfall yet, but in knowing it was inevitable. He had spoken too freely, revealed too much. His greed had blinded him, and now it would destroy him. As the evening drew to a close, I whispered once more, "Enjoy your dinner." He laughed, oblivious to the trap he had walked into. But I knew, and Rashid knew, that the meal would be remembered not for its taste, but for the evidence it had captured. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a strange peace settle over me. The humiliation, the fear, the helplessness, all of it had transformed into anticipation. The plan had worked. The recorder held the truth, and soon justice would follow. The suspense lingered, the anticipation sharp. I knew the confrontation was coming, that the evidence would be revealed, that his arrogance would finally meet its reckoning. And as I closed my eyes, I thought to myself, the meal was served, but justice was the true feast. The day of reckoning arrived sooner than I expected. Rashid had secured the recordings, and together we decided it was time to reveal the truth. I had lived too long in silence, too long under the weight of humiliation. Now, with evidence in hand, I felt a surge of strength I hadn't felt in years. We began with my daughter. She deserved to hear the truth before the world did. I invited her to sit with me in the living room, the air heavy with tension. She looked nervous, her eyes darting toward the door as if expecting her husband to appear. I placed the recorder on the table, my hands steady. "Listen," I said simply. The device played his voice, clear and sharp, dripping with arrogance. "Soon, this will all be mine. The house, the land, everything. He's too old to manage it. Too weak." My daughter's face paled, her hands trembling as the words filled the room. She covered her mouth, whispering, "No, he didn't say that." But the evidence was undeniable. The recording continued, capturing his laughter, his mockery, his plans to strip me of dignity and ownership. Each word was a dagger, but this time the pain was not mine alone. It was hers too. She sat frozen, tears welling in her eyes, torn between loyalty to her husband and shame at his betrayal. I looked at her, my voice calm but firm. "Respect is earned, not stolen." He thought he could take everything, but now you see the truth." She buried her face in her hands, sobbing quietly. I felt a pang of sorrow for her, but also a sense of triumph. The veil had been lifted. Rashid stood beside me, his presence solid, his voice steady. "This is not just disrespect. It's abuse, manipulation, theft of dignity. He must be held accountable." My daughter nodded weakly, unable to argue. The next step was the community. For weeks, my son-in-law had poisoned their minds, spreading lies about my supposed senility. Now it was time to clear my name. Rashid arranged a small gathering of neighbors, people who had once looked at me with pity. I stood before them, the recorder in hand, my heart pounding but my voice steady. The words played again, his arrogance echoing through the room. Gasps filled the air. Whispers of disbelief rippled among them. "We thought he was helping you," one neighbor said, shaking his head. "But he was helping himself," another muttered, "Shameful. To treat an elder this way." I felt the weight lift from my shoulders as their eyes shifted from pity to respect. The truth had shattered the lies, and justice was beginning to take shape. Finally, we took the evidence to the authorities. Rashid accompanied me, his support unwavering. The officer listened carefully, his expression grave as the recording played. "This is clear," he said. "He has admitted intent to seize property unlawfully, and his treatment of you is abusive." Papers were filed, investigations began, and the law took its course. When my son-in-law was confronted, his arrogance faltered. He tried to deny it, tried to twist the narrative, but the evidence was undeniable. His voice, his words, his laughter, they betrayed him completely. He was stripped of credibility, his lies exposed, his plans crumbling. My daughter stood by, devastated. She looked at him with a mixture of anger and sorrow, her loyalty shattered, her heart broken. "How could you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. He had no answer, only silence. The consequences came swiftly. Legal action ensured he could no longer touch my property, no longer manipulate finances, no longer spread lies unchecked. His reputation in the community was destroyed, his arrogance replaced with shame. He had thought himself untouchable, but now he was nothing more than a man exposed by his own greed. I felt triumph, not in his downfall alone, but in the restoration of my dignity. For too long, I had been treated as weak, dismissed as senile, humiliated in my own home. Now the truth had prevailed. Justice had been served, not through violence, but through patience, cunning, and evidence. I turned to my daughter. My voice gentle but firm. "Blood is not enough. Respect is earned. He tried to steal what was not his, but you must remember, family is built on loyalty, not greed." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Her shame heavy, but her understanding clear. The community rallied around me, offering words of support, apologies for believing the lies. I accepted their kindness, but I knew the true victory was not in their approval. It was in reclaiming my place, my dignity, my voice. As I sat alone that evening, the house quiet once more, I reflected on the journey. The fear, the helplessness, the humiliation. All of it had led to this moment of clarity. Justice was not just about punishing him. It was about restoring balance, about proving that age does not erase worth, that dignity cannot be stolen by arrogance. I whispered to myself, "Respect is earned, not stolen." The words carried weight, a lesson not just for him, but for everyone who had doubted me. The confrontation was complete, the consequences delivered, the justice undeniable. Yet the story was not over. The aftermath still lingered, the wounds still raw. My daughter's heart was broken, the community shaken, the future uncertain. But for the first time in a long time I felt peace. The suspense remained, the question of what would come next hanging in the air. But I knew one thing with certainty, I had reclaimed my dignity, and no one would ever take it from me again. The house felt different after the confrontation. The air was lighter, the silence no longer heavy with humiliation. For the first time in months, I walked through my own rooms without fear, without the gnawing sense that I was being watched or dismissed. My dignity had been restored, not by force, but by truth. The evidence had spoken louder than any insult, and justice had finally taken its rightful place at the table. My son-in-law was gone, stripped of his arrogance, his reputation shattered. The community no longer looked at me with pity but with respect. Neighbors who had once whispered about my supposed senility now greeted me with warmth, acknowledging the strength it had taken to endure and to fight back. Their words of support mattered, but what mattered most was the quiet peace I felt inside. My daughter, however, was not so easily reconciled. She carried the weight of shame, torn between the love she had for her husband and the truth she could no longer deny. For days she avoided me, her eyes clouded with guilt. But slowly she began to return, sitting with me in the evenings, speaking softly, asking questions about the past. I could see her struggle, the conflict between loyalty and regret. One night, as we shared tea, she whispered, "Papa, I don't know how to forgive myself." I looked at her, my heart heavy but gentle. "Forgiveness is not about forgetting," I said. "It's about learning. You must remember what happened, so you never allow it again." She nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. It was not full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. I realized then that justice was not only about punishing the guilty. It was also about healing the wounded, about teaching lessons that would endure beyond the moment. My daughter had been blinded by love, manipulated by greed, but now she had seen the truth. And in that truth lay the possibility of growth. As I sat alone later that night, I reflected on the journey. The slap, the humiliation, the gaslighting, the isolation. All of it had led to this moment of clarity. I had served him dinner, but justice was the real meal. That phrase lingered in my mind, a reminder that dignity cannot be stolen, that respect must be earned. Blood is not always family. Respect is the true inheritance. Those words carried weight, not just for me, but for anyone who has faced betrayal. Family is not defined by titles or bloodlines. It is defined by loyalty, by care, by the willingness to honor those who came before. My son-in-law had failed that test, but I had passed it, and so had Rashid, who stood by me when I was most alone. To those listening, I say this: stand against elder abuse. Do not let silence be the weapon that strips you of dignity. Document the truth, speak it aloud, and let justice be heard. Age does not erase worth. Experience is not weakness. Respect is not optional. It is the foundation of family, of community, of humanity itself. If you have faced betrayal, if you have endured humiliation at the hands of those who should have protected you, share your story. Let justice be heard, not just for yourself, but for others who may still be suffering in silence. Your voice is stronger than you think, and your dignity is worth defending. As I close this chapter of my life, I feel a bittersweet peace. The wounds remain, but they no longer define me. The betrayal lingers in memory, but it no longer controls me. I have reclaimed my home, my dignity, my voice. And though the path ahead may still hold challenges, I walk it with clarity, with strength, with wisdom. Respect is earned, not stolen. Justice is served, not begged for. And dignity, once reclaimed, shines brighter than any inheritance of land or wealth.